Right now, we're in the middle of an AI programming war where everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. There's a new feature dropped every single day, but the real winners are those who keep up to date with it and understand how we can leverage them to get more per unit of work hour and how I take things from ticket to code push. Plus, stick around to the end and I'll show you how you get $300 in free credits from Vertex AI. Definitely going to be helpful, especially if you use Sonnet 3.5. So first up is Cursor. Everybody knows this one. It is the IDE of choice. It basically has 7 different core features. If you don't know any of it at all, you can check out the settings video that I have. But what I use it for is actually just the IDE because it's tabbing, it's got autocomplete, it's got suggested next actions where it'll try to guess what you want to do next, has inline editing, an AI panel, the composer, and indexing of documentation. Really good at all of those things, and there's some flexibility that an extension just can't get by actually having it be in the IDE. There are replacements for it where you could use Continue for inline editing, but I primarily use Cursor for tabbing, the autocomplete, suggested next actions, inline edits, everything except for the composer. Now that sounds wild, but I found that the composer can actually be a little bit finicky, and it's very CPU heavy. I find that the IDE crashes a whole lot, and it's not very consistent. That's why I reach for other tools there. So if you want to learn how I tweak all my cursor settings for the most efficient stuff and things like my, cursor ignore file and how to kind of get the most out of it, you can check out a different video that I have on my channel. But I rely heavily on a lot of the kind of baked in features except for Composer. If you want to use Cursor for planning, I recommend using O1 Preview as the model. Don't use it too much because it is 40 cents per request, which is crazy. And Sonnet 3.5 is still goated when it comes to actually executing code. The way that I'm actually operating is I have Cursor, like I said, kind of running the show. But when I want to start something new, let's say I pull up Linear. If I wanted to start something new, I'm actually reaching for Aider or Claude Dev and then using Cursor to finish it. And the reason why is there's things that you could do in Aider that you just can't do in Cursor. And the same thing goes with there's things in Claude Dev that you can't do in Cursor. Of Aider, it's just fast. It's not as user-friendly, so this won't be for beginners and won't be for the people that are not familiar with using command line interfaces. But I actually prefer to have more control, so I really like to use Aider. So Aider here is on the left. And when you get it set up, you basically have a bunch of command line operators. You have these tools. You have add, you have architect, you have ask, you have chat mode, clear code, all these different things. And it gives you full fine control of how these agents are working. And this is a concept that I found to be really helpful as I've been on my journey is multi-agentic flows. They just are better. These tools work differently. You want to separate your tasks into planning and execution. So having the ability to kind of pinpoint what type of agent and what type of actor you want to have executing these tasks for you is really helpful. And that's why I like to reach for Aider is because in just one command, it can go be the architect for me. In just one command, I can ask it questions on how to do something. And there's a syntax that I use. So in the case that I wanted to, add this dot for an event, I would say something to the tune of, I could add those files that are relevant to it. So I know it already has these in context because I did /add space. And then I could just say, ask, how would I implement adding a dot to the miniature? And it's just going to run and it's going to figure out all the things that are relevant to that through, and it'll just start figuring out what is it that needs to get done. And it won't write any code. And that's important because I feel like anytime you ask a question in Cursor Composer, it just wants to just bore through and start writing code for you. This will never do that. And the same thing goes with the amount of configuration and setup that you can do with Aider is just mind-blowing. So they have this file, the conf.yaml. It's an Aider conf.yaml. This one's empty right now. I haven't done a whole lot on it. But what you can do is you can specify read-only files. So if you have, this conventions file, which is similar to the Cursor rules, you can set up conventions saying like, this is how we should do it. and this is the structure of the project. This is how we deal with it. This is where all the important stuff is. You never have to write that again because it's always going to be in there. It's always going to be README. It's never going to touch it. That's really helpful. That's something that separates this. You can do that. You can also, there's a really nice workflow with Aider by Indie Dev Dan, which shout out to him because I'm trying to implement what he's done, which is just having tests built in as you develop. So you can set up a workflow where here's the test command that you want to run tests. So he's using bun in this case. And you can specify the things that you want to edit. This means that these files will automatically be added to any instance when you run Aider. So it's always going to have those in there. And that's really nice because then you can have it where every time that you add something, it's going to test it. And before it even comes back and says what the tokens are, it'll see if the test passed or not. You can also have auto commits. That's really nice. But that's something that I think people are underestimating. It's just the power of these AI assistants when it comes to the config files where you can set up these workflows. Another thing is it has Puppeteer integration. So if you input something that has a link in it, like an error or whatever it is, it'll just go and scrape it, and now it's a part of the context. So I find that really helpful. Now, after I did the ask, I would read through and see, like, how is this something, like, is this something that we want to do? Is it not something we want to do? If I wanted to see, like, an architecture question, I could say, how does this fit into the grander picture of how we're doing things? Is this a better pattern? Should we use a constructor pattern or a wrapper pattern or whatever? You could ask all these different questions, and it's going to be in that mode, and it won't leave it. So that's why I like to lean on Aider a lot. It's also just really, really fast. So that's why I like Aider. It might not have the polished UI of Cursor, but when I want to move fast and handle tasks, it's just awesome for that. The next one I want to talk about is actually Claude Dev, and shout out to them because they're doing stuff that Cursor does not do. Again, all these tools have their own strengths and their own weaknesses, and that's kind of the beauty of where we're at right now. Is if you stay on top of it, you can get better workflows, and we're developing those patterns, us the developers. So the thing with this is it's very task-centric. So it goes step by step, and it's actually looping the whole time. It has unique features where it can inspect the site for you. That's something that Cursor doesn't have. It can run its own terminal. So in this case, I said, I want to get some dark mode stuff, and it'll go through there and it'll ask if you want to edit the file. And it has this whole toolkit underneath the hood that it's using where it can execute commands, it can read files, obviously, it can write to files, it can inspect the site, which is what I mentioned. And that's really, really helpful, where if you have something where it's got, it seems to be okay in the code base, but then there's a client-side error, it'll run inspect site, it'll run its own terminal in here, it'll pop up with, a new looking terminal, and it'll read that, and it'll come back, and it just keeps looping through until it fixes it, and it'll read those types for you. It has full access to the linter. By the end of it, it'll say, okay, cool, we completed that task, and it can give you the ability to have it run conventional commits as well. I think that's really helpful. Just like the fact that it can do run-in loops, it can do screenshot snaps, it can automatically find your tasks or your types, and then it has task planning. I think that's just like a crazy capability. So you can kind of see how I've done this and how I use it, where I just hop around to different ones. And then after I either use Aider or Claude Dev, that's when I'll go and refine. I just find it a better workflow. I've used Cursor a ton, but this last week or so, I've just found it more enjoyable, frankly, to be using this combo. And so again, it kind of runs in this circle where it's like, okay, if I want to do something net new, then I can do that. Another thing with Claude Dev is all these tools have the same patterns where you can do and you can add a folder, you can add a file, problems that looks at the linter, you can paste the URL to fetch the contents of that. And then same thing with Aider, where if I do add space and I do a regex on top of a file where I could do components /star, and then it'll add all of that. So that's really helpful as well. I think you can't underestimate the benefits of treating planning and execution separately. I think that that's really, really helpful. Lastly, if you do want to get those credits, then you just literally just type in Vertex AI Google, and you go here. And you'll just hit try Vertex for free. So if you already have an account with them, just use a different account. Voila. You have to enter a credit card to get the full 300. If you don't enter a credit card, they give you 150, which is still crazy. But the credit card just means that it's not a bot. They won't charge you. So go ahead and do that. And then once you're in there, you can just enable the Anthropic family through the model garden and then go to the chat panel. It's really easy. I can point to a video with more detail on that.